Picture this. You spent years, really, studying a new language. You have painstakingly memorized all the vocabulary. You've drilled the complex grammar rules into your brain. And, you've passed the written exams with flying colors.
Right? You have the certificate.
Exactly. You objectively know this material. But then you step off a plane in a foreign country. Or maybe you just log into an international video call, and a native speaker turns to you and asks a seemingly simple question.
And we all know what happens next.
Yeah. Suddenly your mind just goes completely blank. You freeze. The words are in there somewhere, buried in your brain, but your mouth outright refuses to cooperate.
It's the worst feeling.
It really is. It's a highly relatable, incredibly frustrating experience for so many people. You put in years of effort only to hit this invisible wall right when it matters most.
And honestly, it feels like a catastrophic personal failure in the moment. The immediate reflexive thought is usually, I am just not good at languages, or, I clearly need to go back and study harder. We tend to blame our own intelligence or our work ethic.
But today, we are tearing that invisible wall down. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a fascinating stack of source material that diagnoses exactly why our language learning hits that wall, and more importantly, how to break through it.
Yes, the science behind it is incredible.
It really is. We're looking at deep analyses on the actual biological, neurological, and physical mechanics of listening comprehension and speaking fluency. So, okay, let's unpack this, because the fundamental premise of our source material today is that the traditional way we learn languages,
The vocabulary hoarding and the grammar drill.
right, that approach actually actively works against the brain's natural processing mechanics.
It does. We approach languages like we approach, say, history or biology by hoarding vast amounts of data. We memorize endless lists of vocabulary and we conjugate verbs on paper.
Which feels productive.
It feels very productive. But treating a spoken language like a static academic subject actively works against human biology. So the mission today is to bridge that massive gap between knowing a language conceptually on paper and actually wielding it physically in real time.
Yeah, and it makes sense that if we want to figure out why we can't speak, the output problem, we first have to figure out why we can't process what is being said to us.
The input.
Right, the input problem. Because if you can't catch the ball, you certainly can't throw it back.
And if you ask almost any language learner what their biggest hurdle is regarding input, they will all say the exact same thing. They say, native speakers talk too fast. It's just a blur of sound.
I've definitely said that.
Right. But the auditory science and the linguistics data tell a completely different story. Native speakers aren't actually talking too fast. Language learners are listening too slow.
Listening too slow. Wow. That completely flips the script on how we perceive conversations. How exactly does a person listen too slow? I mean, is it like a processing delay in the brain?
It comes down to cognitive load and how our brains are physically structured to handle incoming information. So to understand this, we need to look at two distinct memory systems. You have your long-term memory, which we can visualize as this massive, cavernous warehouse.
Okay, the warehouse.
Yeah. And then you have your working memory, which functions much more like a busy factory floor. Now, your warehouse is basically infinite. It can store 50,000 vocabulary words without breaking a sweat.
Right.
But all the actual real-time processing, the listening, the comprehending, the assembling of a sentence, that all happens on the factory floor of your working memory. And here is the brutal biological reality. That factory can only handle a maximum of 4 units of information at any given time.
Wait, 4? Just 4 units?
Yes, just 4. That is a hard neurological limit for every human being on the planet.
But that is incredibly small. I mean, a standard conversational sentence is easily 10 to 15 words long.
Exactly. Now think about how we are taught to read from our very first days in school. We learn word by word. We look at a single word, translate its meaning, hold it in our head, look at the next word, translate it, and try to string them together.
Right, the textbook method.
So when learners transition to hearing spoken language, they default to that exact same strategy. They try to catch and translate it word by word. But if your processing factory only holds 4 units, a standard 10-word spoken sentence instantly overloads the system.
Because you run out of space on the factory floor.
Exactly. By the time you've identified, translated, and held on to the first 4 words, the speaker is already finishing the sentence. You are forced to drop the beginning of the sentence just to make mental space to catch the end of it.
Oh, man.
Yeah, you end up perpetually 2 sentences behind, desperately scrambling to piece together fragments while the actual conversation leaves you completely in the dust.
It's basically like trying to catch a waterfall with a shot glass. If you try to catch every single drop of water or, every individual word one by one, you're just going to drown in the sheer volume of information. We clearly need to upgrade the shot glass to a bucket.
I love that analogy, yeah.
But how does years of textbook learning actually enforce this shot glass mentality? Because textbooks are like the gold standard of language education globally.
What's fascinating here is a concept borrowed from computer science: garbage in, garbage out. Now, textbooks certainly aren't garbage, but they present a highly sanitized, very artificial version of language.
Right, it's too perfect.
Way too perfect. If you only feed your brain textbook English, which is rigid, perfectly enunciated, and broken into neat little isolated words, your brain never develops the neural pathways to recognize the messy, blended flow of language out in the wild.
So what's the upgrade to the bucket, biologically speaking?
The biological solution to the 4-unit limit on our factory floor is chunking. This means your brain stops listening for individual words and starts listening for phrases or chunks of meaning.
Okay, so this is similar to how we process phone numbers, right? Because we don't try to hold a string of random disconnected digits in our head.
Exactly. The sources actually use that classic psychological example. If someone rattles off an 11-digit phone number, trying to memorize 11 separate numbers will instantly crash your 4-unit working memory.
So we unconsciously group them.
Right. You hear 136, then 958, then 64907. You've mathematically turned 11 separate pieces of data into just 3 distinct chunks.
Oh, and those 3 chunks only take up 3 slots on your mental factory floor.
Precisely, which leaves 1 slot of working memory entirely free. And that free slot is what allows you to actually grab a pen and write it down without panicking.
That makes so much sense. So when native speakers talk, they aren't firing a machine gun of 15 separate words. They're tossing 3 or 4 chunks. So a phrase like, "I try to see them," is processed as a single unit, not 5 separate words.
Right. But native speakers also physically blend those chunks together. The sounds overlap. Consonants get dropped, so what are you going to do becomes the auditory chunk. What you're going to do.
Yeah, they blur it all together.
And if you've only trained your ear on the robotic, over-enunciated audio files that come with textbooks, your brain doesn't know how to catch those natural chunks. There's a perfect example in the research.
Let's hear it.
A learner who aced every advanced grammar test gets into a taxi, reaches their destination, and as they step out, the driver casually says, "Have a good one." The learner is completely baffled.
Even though those are incredibly simple words.
Yes, if you wrote it down, they know the word have, they know good, and they know one. But they've never encountered those words physically smashed together into a single auditory unit of meaning, because people don't talk like textbooks.
Wow. That reframes the problem so clearly. I mean, the mental factory gets completely jammed on the way in because we're treating words as single drops of water hitting our shot glass. And if the factory is jammed on the input, it perfectly explains why it gets jammed on the way out.
It's all connected.
This mental log jam is what creates the paralyzing psychological barrier when it's finally time to open our mouths.
And the sources refer to this as a true silence epidemic among language learners. It's not just a lack of skill, it's an active freeze response. They illustrate this beautifully with the case study of a professional named Rose.
Yeah, let's talk about Rose. Her situation is incredibly common. She is 26, highly educated, successful. She reads dense English articles without a dictionary, and she drafts these fantastic, grammatically flawless emails for her company.
Objectively, her English warehouse is fully stocked.
Exactly. But put Rose on an international video call with her colleagues, and her microphone stays firmly muted. When a manager specifically asks for her input on a project, her nervous system just completely hijacks her.
The physical panic sets in.
It does. Her heart starts pounding. She freezes up. She smiles nervously at the camera, stammers a quick apology for her bad English, and just goes completely silent. And the ultimate tragedy of Rose's story is that she actually knew the exact answer.
Yes.
The perfect response was sitting in her warehouse. She just couldn't route it through the factory and out of her mouth.
Because of that silence epidemic.
Right. So what does this all mean? Are we essentially failing because we're standing around waiting for the absolute perfect sentence to meticulously assemble itself on the factory floor before we allow ourselves to ship it out the door?
That's exactly what's happening.
It really reminded me of a classically trained musician dealing with intense stage fright. Like someone who knows every note of the sheet music, and they can play the sonata perfectly in the safety of their bedroom. But the second they step out under the spotlight, they completely freeze up because they are terrified of playing one wrong chord.
That analogy hits the nail on the head, and the sources dig deeply into why this happens, tracing it back to profound cultural and educational conditioning.
From school, right.
Yes, from our very first days in a classroom. We are implicitly taught that it is infinitely better to stay quiet than to raise your hand, give the wrong answer, and look foolish in front of your peers. We are conditioned for over a decade to believe that speaking is a performance, and you must only step on stage when you are absolutely certain of perfection.
Which is a brilliant strategy if you're taking a multiple-choice math exam. But it is an absolute disaster for acquiring a spoken language, because language is inherently messy.
Exactly. The danger here is that silence quickly metastasizes into a habit. We start telling ourselves a comforting lie. We say, I'll speak up next time when my vocabulary is a little bigger, when my grammar is a little sharper. I just need to be more ready.
The myth of being ready.
But the sources are ruthless on this point. Waiting until you are ready, or waiting for perfect, is a psychological trap because that day never comes. If you only prepare but never actively practice, you aren't actually improving, you are just waiting.
It's so frustrating to read because Rose possesses all the tools she needs. She's just imprisoned by the fear of deploying them incorrectly.
Which brings us to a really crucial psychological takeaway from the source material. Silence is literally the only mistake you cannot fix.
Well, that's powerful.
Think about the mechanics of a conversation. If you speak up and use the wrong verb tense, the listener might look slightly confused for a second, or they might naturally repeat the sentence back to you with the correct word. You get immediate feedback, you learn, and the interaction moves forward.
Right, it's a loop.
But if you stay silent, the feedback loop never begins. Zero progress is made. Fluency isn't about having a massive, pristine vocabulary hidden away in your mental warehouse. It's about your willingness to use the words you have on the factory floor right now. The sources provide a brilliant example of what real-world fluency looks like.
Okay, lay it on me.
Imagine it is pouring rain outside, and you completely blank on the English word umbrella.
Oh man, that is the exact moment the panic sets in. The brain just says, I don't have the specific noun, therefore I am incapable of communicating. System shutdown.
Right, that is the Rose response. But true fluency is having the courage to bypass the missing word and use the simple elementary words you do know to say, hey, do you have the thing we use when it rains?
Oh, love that.
That is a massive communicative success. The listener is going to understand exactly what you mean. They will hand you the object and they will probably say, oh, you need an umbrella. Boom. You successfully navigated a real-world problem and you just got a free vocabulary lesson from a native speaker.
The thing we use when it rains.
Yeah.
I mean, it's imprecise, it's a little clunky, but it absolutely gets the job done. But let's dig into the next layer of this because the sources argue it's not purely a psychological block. The inability to speak fluently is also a highly physical problem, isn't it?
Yes, very physical.
Because we tend to conceptualize language as a purely intellectual exercise, just a mental dictionary. But we forget that the brain might be fully trained while the biological hardware of the mouth remains completely untrained.
This is perhaps the biggest blind spot in modern language education. Your lips, your jaw, your tongue, your vocal cords, these are complex physical muscles. And forming the unique phonetic sounds of a foreign language requires a highly specific set of physical gymnastics that your native language simply hasn't prepared you for.
Right. English has sounds that simply do not exist in other languages, and vice versa.
Precisely. The source material uses a phenomenal piano analogy to highlight this. Imagine you decide to become a concert pianist. You spend 5 years fiercely studying music theory. You memorize sheet music until you see it in your sleep. You watch 1,000 hours of grandmasters playing on video.
Okay, so your mental warehouse is full.
Exactly. Your mental warehouse knows everything there is to know about the piano. But what is physically going to happen the very first time you sit down on a bench and place your hands on the keys?
Your hands are going to be completely useless. You won't know the physical distance between an octave. Your fingers won't have the dexterity to strike the keys properly. It would sound terrible.
Because your motor cortex hasn't built the neural pathways to command those muscles. Speaking a language is the exact same physical reality. It is a real-time, highly coordinated athletic event for your face.
An athletic event for your face. That's a great way to put it.
Your tongue needs to strike the ridge behind your teeth in entirely new positions. Your breath control has to change. If you don't physically practice the muscular act of making the sounds, your facial muscles will literally stumble when your brain tries to send the signal.
That physical necessity reminds me of that really inspiring anecdote in the research about a young 12-year-old boy in China.
Oh, yes.
He didn't know the neuroscience, but he intuitively understood this physical requirement. Every single morning for almost 9 straight years, regardless of rain or snow, he got on his bicycle and pedaled 40 minutes across the city to the Hangzhou International Hotel.
Yes, and he wasn't employed there. He wasn't making a dime. He went to the hotel grounds simply to intercept foreign tourists and offer them free guided tours of the city.
Just to practice.
Just to practice. His schoolmates constantly ridiculed him, thinking he was throwing his free time away, but he was essentially using those tourists as a free gym for his mouth.
He understood that you can't build a muscle by reading a book about weightlifting. You have to lift the weights.
He was willingly stepping into the discomfort, embracing the inevitable stumbles, and slowly training his physical articulators. And that perseverance obviously paid off. That 12-year-old boy grew up to become the global tech billionaire Jack Ma.
It's an incredible story.
He understood fundamentally that comprehending English is an intellectual pursuit housed in the brain, but speaking English requires the brain and the body working in perfect physical synchronization.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. If we accept that the mouth is a physical muscle requiring mechanical repetition, how on earth do we get it to the gym when we are petrified of looking foolish in front of native speakers? How do we rack up those required repetitions without immediately triggering Rose's video call panic? I mean, we can't all dedicate an hour every morning to biking to an international hotel to, harass tourists.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the paralysis almost always stems from the fear of sounding wrong, which in the language community usually means an obsession with having a flawless native-sounding accent.
Right. The accent pressure is huge.
People think if I open my mouth and reveal a thick accent, I lose credibility. But linguistically speaking, an accent is just a geographic footprint. It tells the story of where your muscles learn to speak. The ultimate goal is clear communication and human connection, not passing for a flawless textbook audio file.
So we have to dismantle the perfectionism.
Yes. Native speakers are listening to the substance of your message, not aggressively judging the phonetic placement of your vowels.
Okay, so we know we need to stop agonizing over word-by-word translation and start listening in chunks.
Yeah.
We know we need to actively override the cultural fear of silence, and we need to treat our jaw and tongue like muscles. Having diagnosed both the mental input problem and the physical output problem, we need to synthesize these sources into a highly concrete, actionable battle plan for the listener.
And thankfully, the researchers actually outline a very specific 30-day blueprint designed to build real-time fluency. And importantly, it is engineered to start incredibly small, deliberately bypassing that paralyzing fear.
Let's walk through it. So days 1 through 10, the sources call this the solo practice phase.
Right. For the first 10 days, you are instructed to speak English completely alone for 10 minutes a day. No conversation partners, no pressure, no fear of judgment. You just narrate your life out loud.
Just talking to yourself.
Talk about the weather, complain about the traffic, describe what you are cooking for dinner. Then, right before bed, you execute a very specific task. You open the voice memo app on your phone and record yourself for 2 to 3 minutes answering a basic question like, what did I do today?
This perfectly mirrors the case study of Daniel from the research. Daniel was 22, freshly hired at a massive corporate firm, and during these high-stakes online meetings, he found he could understand roughly 60% of the English being spoken.
Right.
But when the spotlight swung to him, he would completely blank.
Yeah.
The silence would agonizingly stretch out, he'd stammer out 3 unrelated words, and just shut down.
Daniel recognized that a grammar book wouldn't save him in those moments. So he implemented this exact voice memo method. Just a few minutes every single night, talking to his phone in an empty room.
Now wait, I have to push back on this recording step. Listening to your own voice is agonizing for most people. It's like looking at yourself in a harsh fluorescent mirror for the first time. Why is enduring that cringe so crucial to the process?
This raises an important question because enduring that cringe is precisely where the progress happens. The phone acts as an entirely objective mirror. When Daniel hit play and listened back to his recordings, he wasn't mercilessly judging himself.
He's diagnosing?
Yes, he was diagnosing where his sentences physically broke down and which words he repeated when he panicked. And here is the most profound insight the researchers pulled from his journey. Over the course of a few weeks, Daniel still made plenty of mistakes. But his mistakes changed.
His mistakes changed.
Yes. When your mistakes change, it means you are improving. You start
Yeah.
making the beginner errors and start making more complex structural errors. It's the ultimate proof of neurological progress.
Wow. When your mistakes change, you are improving. That completely reframes the agony of listening to yourself. You aren't hunting for perfection. You're hunting for a higher caliber of error.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's days 1 through 10. You are waking up the facial muscles and diagnosing your output. What is the mechanism for days 11 through 20?
Days 11 through 20 introduce a technique called shadowing. And this is where we aggressively attack the input problem we discussed in section 1.
The chunking problem.
Right. You find a short native speaker audio clip, maybe a 3-minute podcast segment or a YouTube video. You listen to a short bit and repeat it out loud. But the critical rule is that you do not just read the transcript in your normal voice. You must physically mimic the speed, the specific rhythm, the rising intonation, and the breath patterns of the native speaker.
Ah, so this is how we ditch the shot glass and physically mold our bucket. We are bridging the listening and speaking gap.
Exactly. Shadowing perfectly trains the brain for the chunking mechanism. By mimicking the rhythm, you are forcing your physical articulators to recreate the messy, blended reality of spoken language rather than the robotic, isolated words of a textbook.
So you spend 20 days talking to an empty room, diagnosing your changing mistakes, and physically shadowing native rhythms. Now we arrive at the final phase, days 21 through 30.
The final 10 days are dedicated to real connection. For 15 to 20 minutes daily, you must speak with a fellow language learner. Not a pristine native speaker and certainly not a strict language tutor, just another human being who is also stumbling through the learning process.
And what do you do?
You jump on a call and ask simple, low-stakes questions. What are your plans for the weekend? You will inevitably use the wrong verb tense, you will absolutely butcher some pronunciations, and crucially, because you are with a peer, you will laugh at those mistakes together.
So why is it so vital that it's a fellow learner? Is it just to keep the stakes low so you don't trigger that freeze response?
Precisely. You are engaging in real-time communication, but without the intimidating power dynamic of speaking to a native. You are proving to your nervous system that you can survive making a mistake out loud, and the world doesn't end. You are building the physical habit of speaking, which eventually becomes stronger than the ingrained habit of silence.
This is such a liberating lens through which to view language acquisition.
Yeah.
It strips away so much of the suffocating academic pressure. To briefly summarize our journey today, we have to fundamentally shift away from treating sentences as a string of individual words to translate and start listening for chunks so we don't overwhelm our cognitive factory.
Right.
We have to stop viewing the mouth as an output speaker for our mental warehouse and start treating it as a physical muscle that requires literal gym time. And above all else, we have to recognize that remaining silent is the only true failure.
And if there is one thing for you, the listener, to take away from this, it's that you do not need perfect English to begin. You need to begin in order to get perfect English. Relentless, messy consistency is what moves you forward, while the desire for perfection stops you in your tracks.
It's time to throw the shot glass away and just start catching whatever water you can.
I want to leave you with a final, broader thought to mull over. We've learned today that mastering a language requires treating it as a physical, real-world habit rather than a purely academic exercise. So look at the rest of your life. What other intellectual skills or passions are you currently failing to grasp simply because you're trying to memorize them in the warehouse of your mind, instead of having the courage to physically stumble through them in the real world?
That is a phenomenal question to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Go out there today, unmute your microphone, and make some incredibly messy, beautiful mistakes.